producing nation. But how much do you know about this valuable yet finite resource? On our radio program, Guyana's Oil and You, we strike at the heart of every issue with informed views and credible data. The time is now for you to arm yourself with insightful knowledge on your oil wealth.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this week's episode of Guyana's Oil and You. I'm your hostess, senior journalist and editor at Kaieteur News, Kiana Wilberg. Tonight, we're placing the spotlight on health and safety in the oil and gas sector. Our company of focus this evening is Remote MD. Founded more than 20 years ago, Remote MD is one of the leaders in providing strategic healthcare to the oil industry while subscribing to the highest of international standards. Here to help me discuss the work of Remote MD and its operations here are two distinguished gentlemen. We have Mr. Michon Tyrell, Director of International Medical Services, and Eriko Ramundi, Director of Sales and Business Development. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Kiana, for having us.
All right. So tonight we will jump straight into the discussion here. There's lots for us to really go through. But before we get into that, first of all, can you tell me a bit about what Remote MD does here and a little bit about the company's history? So who would like to start with this?
I'll take the lead on that.
Okay.
So as you said, Remote MD was founded many years ago, servicing oil and gas. We were really born out of a need that was seen in oil and gas around medical care, making sure that the medical care that the crew members received offshore was the best that they could get. And the reason for that is you end up with a lot of lost time if you have to send people in. There's a lot of resources that get taken up by doing that. So our founder, Dr. Michael Collar, took notice of that need and started to address it. And the initial phases of his addressing it were in training. How do we get the medical personnel that are providing care out there trained better? A higher awareness of industrial medicine, occupational health, and really starting to go down that road, bring them up to the next level. The next phase of that was introducing a medical control system and telemedicine system, which really puts the provider that's on the vessel, it gives them more support because now they have another physician in the room really working with them and guiding them and just giving them more support so they can be more confident in the care that they're giving and really ensuring that we're treating this patient the best we possibly can and also respecting the international oil and gas standards that have to be followed. The company has responded to several different disasters and environments. Our founder, Dr. Michael Collar, was directly involved in the Horizon incident that occurred. He, was a vital piece to that in the response and how we responded. We had divided medical teams to try to provide care and really support families and individuals. He's gone as far as to, designing hospitals that can withstand hurricanes. We designed one in Plaquemines. It's called Plaquemines Medical Center in Louisiana. They just went through Ida and came through very well, based on those designs. So a lot of these experiences and things that we bring are really helpful to oil and gas because we know that we're always prepared for any situation. It's a very dynamic company.
Thank you. So with that said, it's quite clear that the company has years of experience in dealing with some of the most dangerous situations that you can see occurring in terms of health and safety in the sector. So that's pretty interesting. Now, can you tell us about what really piqued the interest of the company in Guyana, and what are some of the services that you offer here?
So Remote MD caters for their clients. So we saw the need, our clients needed us here. So when a need arises, we started to develop our own clinic. We've been on the shores of Guyana for just over 4 years, but Remote MD Guyana Services has been in a structure here for just over about a year. So we provide occupational health services like, let's say, oil and gas physical examinations. We refer to it as the OGUK. We have agilities examinations. Because with the agility, it's a very special type of examination for the more technical services offshore. We do drug and alcohol testing, TB quantiferin testing. The COVID-19 outbreak, when we first came to Guyana, Remote MD designed a unique system working with the current laws of whatever country that we go to. We work to design very key structures, policies, and protocol to ensure that transmission and reinfection or infection is totally mitigated. So, yes, ma'am. So we have managed to put through over 40,000 persons in our staging facilities without any contamination rate. 0% contamination.
Wow.
Yes, ma'am. So that's in our Houston quarantine facility. Mm-hmm. Now that staging is actually coming to an end, Remote MD's response to that. So we responded on the vessels where we have our medics on those vessels doing random antigen testing just to make sure that we still keep our protocols up to the standard of the oil and gas sector.
And our services in Guyana really kind of fit a lot of they kind of cover the spectrum, right? So it's not only just, our doctors offshore, our Guyanese doctors. So everything from on the vessel, onshore, the clinical services, transportation services, including, secure transport for COVID cases. These are all things that we really take into account because, when COVID came into play, there were a lot of questions that you had to ask yourself, right? What if COVID does happen offshore? How do you manage that? What do you do to deal with that? And luckily, because the way our founder works, he's very forward thinking. And that really drives itself down to the rest of us. So we already had an infectious disease policy in place that really provided a lot of guidance. We added some things to it to help with COVID and those kinds of situations that came up, and really managed every single detail that we could all the way through it.
Thank you for that. So one of the hot topics in the oil and gas industry is local content. Mm-hmm. Everyone wants to know, how are Guyanese being given a leading role to play in partnersps or in the management process of many of the companies that are coming to these shores to get a bite of the oil pie. Mm-hmm. So can you tell us a bit about how many Guyanese are part of the Remote MD operations versus some of your overseas personnel?
So Remote MD Guyana is 100% Guyanese. And Remote MD Guyana makes up 25% of Remote MD, so that's just a quarter of our staffing. We provide training. So let's look at me, for example. When I first started at Remote MD, I started out as a medical coordinator and I worked my way up the ladder. And now I'm in the management seat, the director seat. So it's not just only limited to tailoring to the local content, but Remote MD usually just once the employee or the individual has the potential to grow in a company, Remote MD supports that individual. If we have vacancies available in the country, we do not import personnel. We utilize what we have, and if that personnel does fall short at some point in time where they don't have the qualifications, Remote MD will provide the training for that person. We fly them overseas, get them the training that they need to come back to their country, their host country, to perform the function that they initially applied for. So Remote MD is fully in support of local content and having our citizens develop themselves and grow within an international company.
And it's really, and part of that, kind of feeding off what Michonne was saying, it's not just the local content to keep them in Guyana, right? There's a whole world out there with oil and gas, and again, Michonne's a perfect example of that. He just came back from Mexico and the U.S. representing the company. Oh. Not just Remote MD Guyana, but representing Remote MD. at oil and gas conferences and EMS conferences, medical conferences, and just because he is qualified. So that local content piece is very, very important to us, and it goes from the top level of management all the way down.
So, in the absence of a national local content policy, Remote MD has already achieved 100% local content within its operations.
Yes,
That's pretty fantastic. Now, on the local content issue as well, I'd like to ask you about the importance of setting targets for yourself because as you noted, training is important, capacity building and skills transfer, that is an integral part of ensuring that the Guyanese economy is upskilled to meet some of the needs of the sector. So what are some of the plans for Remote MD, even in the absence of a national policy, to ensure that you continue this upskilling process?
So our plans moving forward are always, like Michonne talked about, to always maintain respect to the local content, right? Regardless of policy, regardless of government policies or anything like that. We always want to make sure that we as a company are investing back into where we're operating because these effects are long lasting, right? So, for us, obviously Guyana oil and gas is very new in Guyana. It's still somewhat in its infancy. So as it grows, we want to expand the training for it. We want to make sure that the positive effects are felt. So that new standard that oil and gas brings in, the training wasn't here before because it wasn't needed before. Now it is. So what we're doing, like Michonne said, we're taking our Guyanese team, we're getting them trained to the nth degree because we want to continue that investment. So as oil and gas in Guyana continues, we are going to continue to invest in the personnel in Guyana.
Okay.
For instance, our COVID cabs that Enrico would have mentioned earlier, where we identify local transportation companies and we personally train all of their drivers in COVID-19 protocols as it relates to simply putting on a mask, donning and doffing your PPEs, putting them on, taking them off, the layman terms. So, we take pride in, giving back. Not just, you don't want to say pride, but you just want to give back and make sure that the quality of care that everyone receives, even because it might not only be for oil and gas, it might be for it's just a simple passenger coming in their car, someone just calling to pick up the phone, hey, I have someone that I need to get to the hospital, but this person was, diagnosed with COVID-19. Would you be able to provide that service? And, not a lot of, Kiana, people will be like, nope. That's you're not coming in my car.
Yes.
So having them have that knowledge, having that training, they will be able to say yes, we can facilitate that service for you.
Okay. So tell me a bit about where you're operating from. Where's your base here? And is your training, do you do any in-house training? Is that facilitated?
Well, we are currently operating out of our office at Parade Street, Kingston, 125A Barrack Street, Kingston, sorry.
Okay.
It's 2 buildings from Parade Street. It's can't miss it. We're totally branded, 3-story building, green and white building. It's hard to miss. And yes, we do have a lot of in-house training. We have our op medics that we support, and they do annual development, right? Annual training.
Our Ocumedics course is actually held monthly.
Okay.
We're looking at different ways of bringing the full suite of training that Remote MD does offer to Guyana. The training that we do in-house is again monthly frequency, whether it's something specific to kind of medicine and industrial and occupational environments, or even, for example, we just had a group of our Guyanese team up in the U.S. completing BOSIA training and all those things, all the necessary offshore environment training and all that stuff, just to come back down. So it's, again, training is really, really, really important to Remote MD. We think that, holding that standard that we take pride in is important. In order to do so, we need to train. So all of us are always training, always improving, and really investing in that.
Thank you for that. Now, Michonne, I just heard that you were on a trip to Mexico as well as the USA regarding representation that's needed for remote MD. And I'm sure, given the international experience you would have acquired, not just from those trips, but many others, I'm sure, what do you think is needed to bring the Guyanese healthcare system on par with what's needed for meeting the needs of the oil and gas sector?
Well, Kiana, after being in the healthcare system in Guyana for just over 10 years, as Edrico said, training. Training is important. Having our facilities come up to par, because as we would have mentioned before, clinical medicine and occupational medicine or industrial medicine are two different medicines. And it's not something that we Guyanese are accustomed to. We're accustomed to clinical medicine. So bringing this industrial medicine or occupational medicine to our shores will further develop, our scope for our healthcare professionals, having them work along with specialists, so you don't have to always fly someone back to their country when we can have our specialists here trained to deal with, yes, they can deal with it on a clinical aspect of it, but in offshore, in oil and gas or industrial medicine, it's totally different, because you don't want to suture something that you don't necessarily have to suture, because that reduces the manpower on that vessel. So we in clinical medicine we act. We act. Industrial medicine you act too, but you act a different way. So training is important. Development of our facilities, development of our health centers in our rural areas. You don't always have to fly someone to the Georgetown Public Hospital or National Referral Hospital, where our regional hospitals can handle it. So having training and development of our facilities, that will bring our healthcare system onto the level that it should be.
Noted. Eriko, what's your take?
Kind of just being kind of fresh and getting familiar with the healthcare system specifically down here, I mean, I have to agree with Michon. We have found some of the most caring and capable medical providers down here. And the change that you're seeing is not only just going to affect oil and gas, right? There's mining industry and all these other things, construction and things that are really going to start to be held to that higher standard. So the healthcare environment has to be prepared for that standard. So oil and gas is starting to introduce that, because they're governed by these international regulating bodies and whatnot. So realistically for healthcare, it does boil down to training. It does boil down to that experience. And, it's important for us to continue that. We have our physicians certified in things that you used to have to go to Scotland to receive the training for, something as simple as a physical. That's one of the things that COVID kind of changed, right? It changed the virtual environment, the way you can train, the way you can meet. So now there's more opportunities. So, we had that training completed. Now we have physicians here in Guyana who can complete, physicals that prior to that weren't available here. So it really speaks to the quality and the care that these providers give and their desire to continue to improve.
What about from the legislative perspective? Because, Michon, you just noted that what we're accustomed to in our environment is the clinical aspect, but industrial medicine is a completely different ball game. From the legislative perspective, do you find that it is sufficient enough, or do you think there's a definite need for an overall modernization of the legislative framework?
It depends on the area that we're going to be looking at, but yes, I would say that we can have like an overview of our healthcare system to take, so that we can have both systems combined. So you don't have to say, oh, that's an industrial hospital and that's a clinical hospital. You just have a hospital. Right, so you don't have to identify, okay, that hospital is the best one, that hospital is the best. It is, we just have a overall system where all the hospitals follow this protocol, they follow this system. So you don't have to have that fight as to, if that person goes there, they're not going to get that kind of care. If they go here, we should have a general system. We should trust our healthcare system. Regardless of the type of medicine that is going to be performed, we should have. And if the local people don't trust their system, we can't have the international people trust our system. Right. So we need to have trust in our healthcare system, and having everyone on the same level just builds that trust.
Now, were there any major challenges that the company encountered while trying to set up operations? if I remember correctly, you said that it was here in some form 4 years ago, but you now have an official structure.
That's right.
About a year.
Yes.
Okay, so did you find any sort of red tape or major challenges to the business environment?
I wouldn't necessarily say red tape. I think the biggest challenge for us being a medical company was finding the medical providers that had the experience needed for the industrial and occupational environment, as we've alluded to. Finding that medical network, right? Finding that those resources and medical personnel that may have already been here. But again, a lot of these items weren't needed before, so it was all kind of a new environment, still, again, in its infancy, but it's growing, and it's growing in a very positive way. And I think, the impact that Guyana is going to feel from this is going to be just amazing as it continues to expand, and Guyana really starts to see the return, and especially from that medical perspective, the more experienced providers being out there, And our big thing again is when we train people, it's not just to, serve remote MD better. We believe that when, or even our clients for that matter, it's really about that individual being able to invest in themselves, and us as a company investing in them, because they may not stay with remote MD for the next 30 years, right? But when they do go, especially as doctors and physicians, when they do go back to that public sector or private sector, whatever they're practicing outside of that industrial world, they're going to have a greater wealth of experience. So now that network is starting to build. It's really starting to develop. And I think that's just all positive.
I just want to go back to one of the questions I asked earlier about the number of Guyanese. Did you note how many Guyanese
we
are on the
have
team?
currently 22 Guyanese on our team.
Okay. Thank you for that. Now, just to wrap up our program this evening, I'd just like your concluding thoughts on the government's push for local content, and what would be your advice to companies, because Remote MD has already shown that it's 100% local content. What would be your advice to other companies looking to set up shop here and work with Guyanese? How would you suggest they go about getting local content right?
For our perspective, and I'll take the first half of that, I guess, my advice and our advice, I should say, as a company to other companies coming in would be anticipate a very eager workforce, a workforce that wants to train, a workforce that really wants to learn and wants to invest in themselves and grow. The government has, we know there's local content policies that are being put in place. They're working on things and whatnot, and a lot of I had the opportunity to attend a conference in Houston where, some of the ministers attended and gave us a discussion panel, if you will, about this exact subject. And the goals, that they set are really to take note from other nations that have seen, oil and gas booms and developing nations and things that have grown from that, and really take the positive lessons and the negative lessons. So you learn what to do and what not to do. And for companies coming in, know that, the people here really want to learn. They want to be part of this international industry and really provide themselves opportunities to expand outside of even Guyana itself.
Okay, and Michonne, what are your thoughts on how companies can go about getting local content right and the government's efforts?
Well, as we kept saying there was never a need for these services here in Guyana. But I can tell you, working with our healthcare system, working with labs, working with hospitals, I know they're eager. Because, if we request a service, and this is totally, true. You request a service, they can't provide it. The next day, a phone call comes through. What can we do? They're just seeking the opportunity to be able to provide this service. So that in itself, having that eagerness to want to do it, it's there. It's there. So coming into Guyana, you're going to be comfortable. You're going to be, because I've always been told by my international counterparts that Guyanese are very nice people. We're very warm, hospitable people. So you will have that eagerness, as we kept saying. Erico just mentioned, we will have that eagerness. You will have a hard-working force, So you won't. There's nothing to be afraid of. There is, except the heat, but there's nothing to be afraid of. But yeah, that's my take on it.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for this really enlightening and easygoing discussion. I do hope we can have you guys back on the program in the future to speak about perhaps the expanding work of your company and how you've been going about training Guyanese, and perhaps to get to know some of the Guyanese who are on your team. So with that, thank you so much for making the time to be here this evening. And to our audience, as usual, thank you for joining us. Be sure to join us next week, same time, same place, for another discussion on Guyana's oil and you. Good evening, gentlemen. Thanks again.
Thank you,
for
Kiana.
having
This was
us.
a pleasure. Thank you.